komo mai. Welcome to my channel, Mo'o Musing, where I read and analyze how stories reflect and shape our world through my personal lens as a Pacific Islander. I did post an About Me video recently. Check that out if you'd like. For this video, I am so excited to do one of my favorite things, which is to look back and reflect on the previous year, 2024. 2024 had a lot of highs and lows for me. I finished my master's while working full-time, and I missed a lot of sleep, and I was under a lot of stress. But I made it out. Then after me, I got to devote more time to one of my favorite things to do, which is reading. Stories are so important for learning lessons and seeing the world through different perspectives. Of the 57 books that I was able to cram into mostly the latter half of last year, I have a dozen that I rated about 4.75 to 5 stars. Of the 12, half are fiction, and these 6 books are the ones that I'm going to be focusing on for this video. I'll do a second video on the 6 nonfiction books that I rated really highly. My first book, Gods of Jade and Shadow by Silvia Moreno-Garcia, who is a Mexican author. I got this book randomly. I was with my partner in the city. I tried to go into every bookstore that we walked past. So we were walking past a fantasy and sci-fi focused bookstore that actually sold used and new books, which I love a good deal. And when I was checking out, the bookseller was so excited for me that he saw that I was getting this book by this specific author, and I just know you're gonna love this one. And he was so right. I loved this book and devoured it pretty quickly. This was my introduction to Silvia Moreno-Garcia, and I ended up reading a few more of her books in 2024, but this one still came out on top for me. In this book, you follow Cassiopeia Tun, a woman who is forced to live with her grandfather and take care of the house and everyone in it. She dreams of traveling to cities, but doesn't see how. So she searches through her grandfather's home for funds to leave and stumbles upon the Mayan god of death, who betrayed and lost his underworld kingdom to his brother. This kicks off a wonderful adventure with vibrant descriptions of the cities they visit, juxtaposed against the dark undertones of traveling with a god of death. The book starts off so strong with a beautiful introduction to Cassiopeia and the tone of the story. So I'm going to go ahead and read that on page 3. Some people are born under a lucky star, while others have their misfortune telegraphed by the position of the planets. The tension of the forced journey between Cassiopeia and the god of death gave me some deliciously compelling quotes. The god of death gaze fixed upon her. She thought he had not looked at her yet, and only in that instant did she materialize before him. It was an uncomfortable sensation because his gaze was cool, and yet it burned. Cassiopeia wanted to bring him, the god of death, down a peg. And though it is impossible to humble God, her youth allowed her to naively think it might be done. And the last quote I will share, for how long she wondered, and she had to admit to herself that part of what kept her next to him was not just the promise of freeing herself of the bone splinter or a sense of obligation, but the lure of change, of becoming someone else, someone other than a girl whose starched shirts and shone shoes and had to make do with a quick glimpse of the stars at night. And there was such beautifully intriguing world building that kept me captivated. The imagination of mortals shaped the gods, carving their faces and their myriad forms, just as the water molds the stones in its path, wearing them down through the centuries. Imagination had also fashioned the dwellings of the gods. On to the second book that I want to share, Islands of Shattered Dreams, which is a historical fiction written by Chantal Spitz, a Maori native Tahitian author. This book has stuck with me, and it is now in my top 5 reads, my all-time favorite top reads. This book is considered fiction, but is very much based on history. France's nuclear bomb tested in the ocean and islands surrounding what most people know as Tahiti, an island among many islands, which is now called French Polynesia. As the foreword names, the book was first published in 1991, and because it is critical of the French government, rightly so, the reactions were mixed. Island of Shattered Dreams follows 3 generations of families set against a backdrop of French Polynesia in the period leading up to the first nuclear tests. The story was such a page turner for me because of the beautiful lyrical writing, characters I rooted for, and the depth of the familial relationships. I enjoyed so much for the book, and I want to share my highlights. The prologue dives into the dynamics that occur in Tahiti and its surrounding society islands between foreigners and natives. Foreigners lack the curiosity to understand and respect the existing culture. And there's a longer poem written in the book, but I'm going to share a snippet, and it's from the perspective of a visiting white man. This is a white man visiting one of the islands within French Polynesia. And he's observing, no one's starving, no wandering beggars, too much communal living, too much helping one another, too much sharing, a real hell. What are you talking about, bro? The multicultural family story starts with Temotua, born and raised in Tahiti. Then France requested all young men join the war effort, and Temotua left his home for several years, only to return a very different man. Until the end of his days, Temotua will avoid speaking of these terrible years when he was at war, trying in vain to cover the images, sounds, and smells of death with the fierce love he bears his land, his wife, and his children. This is when he's first come back. He is trying to cleanse himself of all the horrors that he saw abroad. And in an unthinking movement arising instinctively from the past, he strips naked and dives into the sea. The sweet liquid caress that made him a man, cleansing his powerful body of all the tears he has cried over the white man's madness, letting fresh tears mingle with his ocean, weeping for his brothers abandoned in a foreign land, so cold. Then you meet Emily Emede, child to a Tahitian woman and a white man, very much kind of shedding light on the experience of someone who is two ethnicities. The daughter, Emily Emede, preoccupied with understanding this land where she can sense her body taking root, being born again in the love she feels for it, and in the welcome this new world shows her, this world where she feels her deepest wounds begin to heal. In this world, she meets Temotua, his soul torn apart by the white man, while she is torn apart by this society that is trying in vain to make her white. Then there's a beautiful line about the love that blossoms between Emede and Temotua. He wants only to take care of her, to be her companion through joy and pain. He knows she is the only woman he will ever love, and he is ready to devote his life to her, his whole life. He waits for her. He belongs to her. But the reader is constantly reminded of the French influence sinking its teeth into Tahiti and slowly draining it of its vibrancy. As Temotua first saw, in his heart, time is rushing out of control, troubling people's minds and surreptitiously filling their hearts with shame for the Maori world and admiration for the pale reflections of the foreigner's world. It's so sad because the children Meta and Temotua have struggle with the changes happening in their homeland, but they do succeed in their own ways in spite of it. Emede and Temotua's children, a mixture of two cultures, will never be whole. When their minds and spirits come to understand the world of the white people, their souls will cry out with the pain of their land and their people, eternal uprooting of the spirit, a mortal anchoring of the belly. This is still in reference to the children that Emede and Temotua have. There is nothing left but their terrifying disillusionment of children who are discovering the reality behind appearances when all hope of hope is gone. As sad as some of these quotes I've shared are, or as devastating as they feel, there are moments of love and hope throughout the story that really make you reflect on how you yourself want to move through the world and impact your relationships, cultivate the beauty of those around you. The next book is a brutal gem, Immortal Dark by Tigest Girma, an Ethiopian author, is a fantasy and dark academia within fantasy specifically. With all books, you should check content warnings, especially this book, which tackles some pretty heavy themes. This book follows Kaiden, orphaned and now alone since her sister disappears, trying to figure out how her sister disappeared and being pulled by her family's legacy. She ends up at Uxley University, confronting Sisenya, the vampire bonded to her family. This book beautifully showcases the brutality and darkness of a vampire story and the world in which they live. Kaiden has spent most of her life alone or with very few people around her, so my heart swelled in hope as she forged friendships and alliances within the university. But things threaten the trust she builds at every turn. This place would ruin her new friends, brush their souls against old words that would take root inside and manifest in destructive ways. Kaiden was already lost, but she could guard them from it, the weakness of a person's psyche, the descent into madness. This book was such a page turner with short chapters and multi-layered plot and characters. You're constantly learning more, craving more at the same time, and that's why I loved it so much. Now for the fourth top fiction read for me for 2024. Also a fantasy dark academia by Emma Wang. Okay, so there's a scene in Harry Potter where Hermione figures out the Sorcerer's Stone. I bring up this scene because Hermione has been searching for the answer and comes up to Ron and Harry and slams a giant book on the table in front of them once she figures out what the Sorcerer's Stone is and what it's used for. And I love that scene because it perfectly illustrates the incredible payoff when you are studying something so deeply and finally figure it out. You get this feeling multiple times throughout this book. Sayona, female main character, becomes the first woman to test into becoming a high mage. The misogyny that already exists in the high magistry means none of Sayona's male colleagues collaborate on research and are generally horrible towards her. Sayona needs an assistant in her lab, and instead of getting someone qualified, she is assigned the janitor, who is Quen, considered within the society of the book as less than. Sayona's own prejudices kind of reveal themselves, but the janitor's quick study and hard work soon win her over. The magic system is incredibly intriguing, and as someone who loves the nerdy side of dark academia, you will appreciate this book. Without revealing much more, I loved this story so much. The Quen's plight as a people is relatable on so many levels, being an indigenous person. Their dying language and ways and horrible treatment from a society that views them as less than human is heartbreaking. This was a book that had me crying like 9 pages in and 3 more times after that. Also, anyone exhausted living in a capitalist society that exploits some for the success of others will find solace in this book as well. I was rooting so hard for both of the main characters throughout the book, and the dialogue they have that challenges the very system they live in is inspiring. If you can lie to yourself that you're a good person despite all evidence, then suddenly it is so, then within this system, anyone with self-delusion can admit himself to heaven. This is nonsense. It's not nonsense, Sayona protests. And it's not about lying, it's about intentions. I think it's about convenience. Kamel shot back. Like most mages' endeavors, it's much easier to tell yourself you're a good person than it is to actually be one. Definitely check this book out. The next 2 books I listened to were from the library, so I don't have specific quotes, but I'll quickly go through the premise of the stories and my musings. The Shape of Dragon's Breath, which is a fantasy by Moniquill Blackgoose, is an indigenous author, a member of the Seanock Wampanoag tribe in Massachusetts and descendant of some McQueen Ossissaw. The story follows Anaquis, a 15-year-old from the remote island of Musquepaug. When she comes upon a dragon's egg that hatches, it is required to be reported, and she must go to the English colonizer established school to learn how to shape a dragon's breath. I relished Anaquis's commitment to kindness, even when other students are horrible towards her, and her tenacity to learn what she needs to for her dragon and her community is so steadfast on her goal, which I love to see in a character. This also has some sapphic romance and amazing scenes where Aniquist absolutely owns the other students at the university. This is the first book of the series, so anyone that reads it will be anticipating the next book, which hasn't come out yet, and I haven't seen a release date, but if you do, let me know. The last book I'll cover for this video, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, is a fantasy by V.E. Schwab, a white woman author. This book already has quite a bit of traction online, so I'll make my musings short. The book starts off with a desperate young woman in France in 1714 making a deal with a god Addie later decides to call Luke. A deal or a curse to be forgotten by everyone she meets, but she remains young and lives as long as she wants until she's ready to give up her soul. It's intriguing because the exact wording of the deal is brought up multiple times throughout the 300 years of Addie meeting with the god on the anniversary of her deal every year. Addie and Luke very much so have a love-hate relationship, and you see the very real implementations of everyone forgetting her existence, the devastating loneliness it gives her. Addie eventually meets a man who remembers her, and their meet cute is pretty funny. What I found so intriguing about this book is the history between Luke and Addie and the tension and conversations they have surrounding art, history, being remembered, time, and life itself. My fiance didn't even read the book, but I explained it to him, and it's such a fun idea to toy with. The deals made with Luke and who makes them and the limitations of time. Also, the ending is just incredibly satisfying. I love reading so much for the simple fact that books provide me with lessons and seeing the world through a different perspective. I appreciate you watching, and please like and or subscribe if you'd like to see more of this content. Ahui ho.